Hey guys, I hope you're having a good day so far. So if you remember last class we went over properties of parallelograms. We talked about the fact that a parallelogram is a quadrilateral whose opposite sides are parallel. And there are 4 other properties that fall under for parallelograms. So we went through our problems, we got all the way through the first page. And we did not get a chance to do the second page, so make sure that you're flipped to the second page, and we're going to finish up these notes. Let's see. Okay. So the first type of special parallelogram is a rhombus. So it's important to note that any of these special parallelograms have all of the properties of basic parallelograms and then a few additional. So it's going to be important that you keep these all straight and that you really learn these different properties. So for a rhombus, it's a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So if this is the first video of mine that you're watching, you'll notice that the stylus isn't that great. So you've got to work with me there. So we know that all the sides are congruent. And most of you guys really seemed to get that. You understood that already going into last class. So that's a good head start. One of the properties of a rhombus specifically is that the diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, so remember that means that they form 90-degree angles. So hopefully, coming right off of our congruent triangle unit and using Pythagorean theorem all year so far, hopefully this should be signaling to you that at some point we're probably going to have to use something with right triangles, something with congruent triangles here. Also, the diagonals bisect pairs of opposite angles. Okay, so what that means now. It means that, so this vertical diagonal going up and down, it bisects angle S into 2 equal angles, and it bisects angle O into 2 congruent angles. Then also the horizontal diagonal will bisect angle W and C. So remember, opposite angles are congruent in parallelograms, and so if 2 congruent angles are both bisected, you're going to end up with 4 congruent angles. So that's why, so for example, this S is split into 2 with a single hash mark, and O also has single hash marks. Okay. For a rectangle, I think that most students can identify rectangles, and they know that 2 sides are one length, 2 sides are another length, they have 90-degree angles. So the definition of a rectangle, a parallelogram with 4 congruent angles. So something to remember is that if they are congruent angles, they have to be 90 degrees each, because the total is 360, right? We did that on our first day of the unit. In a quadrilateral, the total is 360. So if all 4 are congruent, that gives us 90 degrees each. It's also important to note that we say that a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 congruent angles, rather than it's a parallelogram with 90-degree angles. Okay, we want to be as specific as possible and as mathematically correct as possible. The 90 degrees part is what we conclude from knowing that they are congruent angles. And next, so a property that is specific to rectangles is that the diagonals are congruent. Okay, so if we're drawing pieces for our rectangle, we have our 90-degree angles, we have our diagonals, and each of those diagonals are going to be congruent to each other, so the entire length of the diagonals. So as we move down to square, a square, as I said last class, it's what would happen if a rhombus and a rectangle, like if they had a baby. A square is both a rhombus and a rectangle, so it's kind of that very, very special parallelogram. So it's going to have all of the properties of a rhombus and all of the properties of a rectangle and all of the basic properties that a parallelogram has. So again, right here, a square is a rhombus and a rectangle. So we can go ahead and draw in all of those properties that we know. Okay, so what I want you to do at this point is for each parallelogram, you're going to choose the best name. So you're going to name. So we already know that it's a parallelogram. So your options are parallelogram, rhombus, rectangle, square. Okay, if there's nothing special about it that makes it a special parallelogram, then it is just going to be parallelogram. Once you name your parallelogram, you're going to find the measures of the numbered angles. Okay, so that's important to note that these little numbers here are not angle degree measures. It's how we're identifying those angles instead of using letters. Okay, so work through those two problems. You're going to check your answers with Mr. Wodach, and then he's going to give you some practice working with this. He will have an answer key, so he can help you out throughout this if you have questions, and then I will see you guys next week.